Thanks everyone for joining us via live stream. Today we're just closing out a day-long executive roundtable with the Council on Foundations. And we've spent the day thinking about ways that the Council on Foundations can optimally serve community foundations. So we've had 20 CEOs of community foundations from all over the country come together. We explored many different topics. We talked about data and metrics and policy and advocacy. We talked about standards and leadership and different ways of framing the identities of our organizations. So we thought the best way to recap the day would be to pull together a few of our CEOs and ask them a couple of questions. So we have with us Stuart Comstock-Gay from the Delaware County Foundation.
Delaware Community Foundation.
Delaware Community Foundation.
It's a state, really.
That's right, that's right. Not just a community. We have Sherry Armstrong from the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond. We have Kelly Ryan from Encourage. And we have James Head from the East Bay Community Foundation. So I wanted to just throw out some questions and see if we can have some discussion. The first question I have for the four of you is, what was the most inspiring idea that you encountered today? So anyone who wants to jump right in.
Well, I'll start with a real basic idea, just essentially the idea between the lines, what is the community foundation of the 21st century? Mm-hmm. And that we can talk about, we're place-based, we worked with diverse donors, we have endowed funds that make grants, and we gather people in the community to come together to solve problems together. But what do we do to push that as the world's changing, as we have a variety of crises in the world around the environment, around the economy, around race and equity? What do we do to push community foundations so that we're responsive to the needs of the next generations?
Yes, that is inspiring. Does anyone else have another idea that they encountered today that they found inspiring?
I think, following up on Stu, for me, it was within the room, the affirmation that everybody had about the fact of service to community. Mm-hmm. And that seems especially important given today's times and the issues many residents in the communities that we serve are going through. But the notion that community foundations are focused on and devoted to place and to serving community is something that I think will allow us to stay relevant as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, to pick up on that, it's not just about asset growth, that really sort of pivot and shift to, we're here to serve the community and we're here to help to make the community better, and that's a means to that end versus that's what we're about. Mm-hmm. So that was inspiring to hear those conversations.
Mm-hmm. So as opposed to idea, and I think it is a manifestation or an example of the idea of service to community and being of community, was a story from today, and that was from the St. Croix Foundation. Mm-hmm. And so deeply inspirational in terms of it is about more than money, and it is about, in the wake of crisis, losing your own home and being the first on the ground to help organize before FEMA hits. Mm-hmm. Tells me that they have built the kind of trust and relationships, and that they are of community.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was so inspiring.
That's so true. Thank you for saying that, Kelly. And the idea that we are not focused on assets. For some of us who've been in this field longer than perhaps we should have, for 20 years that's been the discussion. We need to do something other than talk about assets. But it feels like we've arrived at a place, by and large, where people say, what are you doing in your community? What are you doing in St. Croix? What are you doing in East Bay? What are you doing anywhere else to actually change your communities? And that's how we ought to be starting. And that was a universal sentiment in the room, which is very cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is the first time, and I have been participating in a number of these for a number of years, that idea of what we measure our success by, and this has been talked about for a long time is, introduction by asset size, and that's not the measure by which we should identify our impact. But today I felt that there was a receptiveness in the room to talking about the structures and the vehicles that we use to assess ourselves as a field. And in fact, many of them focus on assets. Mm-hmm. So, we talked about the annual survey and listing top 10 by assets. So thinking about and holding up that mirror and looking at ourselves as a field, how are we measuring, and what tools maybe need to be revisited so that we have tools and data by which to convey metrics or impact other than financial.
Revisited or created.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
That's true.
And to this point of tools, so were there any concrete constructive tools that you were able to put into your toolkit that you will take home and start using in your community foundation?
I want to get a hold of Troy Hannes from Spartanburg Community Foundation. The way he uses the 5 capitals and uses those to measure success. I want to get and see what he's doing with that. I don't have it yet, but I want to see it.
Yes. Any other tools that you all decided you'd like to take home?
Well, I just think the framework that we went through, all the different ways to really test your strategy and think about where you are, and just the process that Lancaster went through and you helped facilitate it, just gave a different way to really look at the information and those concrete questions and those concrete areas. I think it was really helpful. And then when we made the shift to try to think about it as a network versus just our individual community foundations, that was a helpful discussion. And it also was challenging, I think, which was okay, because it sort of helped you to figure out we have a lot more work to do together, but that was helpful.
Yeah, for me the tools were very helpful. What was probably more important was being in a room and being able to know that there are other community foundation CEOs who are struggling with the same set of issues that we are in the East Bay. How to be of service, in a different era than what we had even 3 years ago, and the notions of looking at ways to not just be a leader, but to also create leadership within the community that can hold us as well as others accountable, and that was helpful to hear and to participate in.
I thought what CF Insights is trying to do with the CF Leads leadership matrix, to try to simplify it and boil it down and develop metrics around that. I'm really excited to see how that evolves, really over the next 8 months. I think they're ready. They're saying they want to have something done by March or April, and I'm sure they're working with CF Leads on that.
Yeah, and it'll be even more interesting, I think, to be able to see all of the different ways that people are collecting data, and that they'll have them on their website so that we can see all the different ways that people are using metrics. We should be able to just click and see what other community foundations are using. So I think that will be a constructive tool for many organizations. I'm also interested in thinking about how you think we might be well positioned to collectively work together to enhance communities. We talked about our differentiators a fair amount today. How do you think we might be well positioned collectively to work together to enhance communities?
Well, I would just say I think this pivot or shift where it's community focused first, that means you're going deeper in your community, in my mind. You're working on issues. There are things that are emerging. And it seems to me that that's a good opportunity to align around things that are common in our communities. I would say, even though we're uniquely different in some ways, we still have workforce development issues. We have housing issues. We have things related to education. And as we do more individually in our communities around those things, there's an opportunity to collectively learn how we could move together and align, and even bring new metrics to bear, or possibly influence policy or those kinds of things. So I think issue-centered or mission-centered work that gives us the opportunity to learn across communities and align is a big opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think just the fact that as community foundations, we have an ability to go much deeper around policy and advocacy, and especially in an area where that's so important to help to sort of mitigate some of the structural barriers that those most vulnerable in our communities are facing. You know, the discussion today about, you know, the differentiators and the ability to use those as philanthropic institutions, I think it's really, really important.
I was very pleased and hopeful to hear the conversation around potential shared metrics. So what might shared indicators that would demonstrate a collective movement or progress, particularly for structural inequities or those that are not being served. And looking at some of our neighbors, the example of Community Foundations of Canada, and how early data and shared data and metrics then enabled them to do policy across the country, right? And I think there was an appetite for that in the room today. The other piece on metrics that was exciting to me was revisiting, hearing CF Insights and the Foundation Center revisiting something called the Community Foundation Atlas, which includes our international colleagues, and I find a great deal of inspiration from a lot of our international colleagues in terms of expanding our thinking and how we do our business.
You know, the mere fact that we came together to have this discussion, that the council pulled us together and is looking to do more of these, kind of reminds us, because we haven't had a lot of these larger convenings, and not that this one was large, but just reminds us that we do have a lot in common. And I think if people are, you know, the synapses are firing again, saying, oh, right, you're doing this too. How can I work with you? How can I learn from you? That's always been going on, but I think really being very conscious about how important that is. And this meeting suggests to me that it's another place that's happening.
Yeah, I was so struck by how much we had in common, how many different elements we're all collectively using already, and it felt to me like we had more in common than we did disparate. Especially when we talked about leadership and we talked about our calling to leadership. There were so many people who were like-minded in why they felt called to lead a community foundation. So I'm really interested in thinking about this juncture at our point in history and thinking about what energizes you the most about being able to lead a community foundation.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think we are in a unique position to provide value to how communities respond to the complex issues that they face, and especially that many of the families and individuals in those communities face. The example I would use for the East Bay in California is the recent regulations around public charge, which would penalize immigrants and refugees who use public services in the context of their qualifications for citizenship. And it's a set of regulations that, you know, are very punitive in nature, and I think intended to really shy them away from actually using the services that, you know, that are crucial to them. And a number of the community health clinics in the Bay Area are concerned about it and have rallied together and approached us at the Community Foundation for help in getting the word out regarding the regulations and in doing policy work to try to make sure that they, if they're going to be put in place, that they're sensitive to the needs of those who are most vulnerable. And, you know, that those opportunities, I think, position us to be of value, you know, to the community, not just in the short term, but the long term.
I think about two things. There are two. You know, one, the world is becoming so much more complex, And issues, I mentioned this earlier here, but issues of race, issues of a global economy, issues of, in this country, fierce partisanship, increasing technology, climate change. It's a time when a lot of things are coming together, and we as a humanity have to begin to address these. Being in a community foundation where we have a tent that includes lots of different types of people, that's a really exciting perch from which to work with people. And I say perched loosely, but the idea we get to work with all kinds of people and hear their ideas and bring people together and come to a solution. So to me, that's a really exciting reason to be in a community foundation right now. Second thing I think about is, I'm not sure if it was Barack Obama who said this, but somebody said, the hardest job in a democracy is being a citizen. And I think of community foundations as places where we try to teach each other to be better citizens. We uphold the idea of citizenship, residency, and I'm not being limited in my definition of citizenship, but we can be better, and we as community foundation can bring people together to solve problems. So that's what excites me, and I think that's what's inspirational right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think it's all that's been said, but I also have this sense of, after sort of working in community for 30 years and doing this type of work, I feel just a sense of responsibility, that it's really, really important, and especially when you've been in sort of a system of community foundations where they've been growing and we've been able to have assets and we've been able to grow in a way, you sort of almost just feel like we have even a bigger responsibility to do something big and be better at what we're doing, just because we're privileged where we sit in terms of people have invested in us and given us resources and have trusted us to do what's right for the community. And so I think it's that, now there's no better time than to take that leadership role and just do what hopefully our donors from way back when intended us to do, to take leadership and be responsive and really take action, because it's really important right now.
Absolutely.
What energizes me is the idea of community as the unit or organizing framework for change, and that to live into that organizing framework and to live into being truly of community, and having co-creation and user-centered processes and true ownership by community, right, of community, is, I think, the true potential that we have as community foundations. The second thing that excites me is that we have a number of different assets that can be deployed and aligned to advance mission and to model and live our values. And those assets include human capital, social capital, reputational, and financial. And I see more community foundations beginning to step into mission-aligned investing, and I think that excites me, because I think it's a tremendously underutilized tool for community foundations.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Agree.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. It's an incredible time. It's an incredible responsibility. It's wildly energizing and inspiring to be with all of you. So I wish you all well. I can't wait to see what the Council on Foundation puts together to address some of these opportunities that you're so well positioned to really lean into. So any final words before we say goodbye to our viewers at home?
Viewers at home. Thank you to the council,
Thank
and
you.
we look forward to more discussions.
Yes, so thank you.
Thank you.